I worked at Six Flags last spring and summer. Well, technically a freelance arts company leasing vending spots there. I was one of the oldest people hired. I was 18 at the time, attending college while most of my coworkers were in high school. I took photos in a sort of old-timey dress-up shop. It was honestly one of the most fun jobs I'd had. I was hired back in March 2018 and started to work in April, when the park was open on weekends only before the official opening. I had been working for about a month and the park was now open during the week for less than 10 hours per day, so I was able to work all day, but was unfortunately the only one in the shop as college was on summer break and high school was still in session until mid-June. You can see where the story's going. I was alone all day during the week and had some coworkers on the weekends. I was so terribly alone during the day that I'd walk across the path to go see my other coworker out of boredom. When I was outside of my shop during the day, I began to notice a man hanging around my area. I had mainly seen him walk by very slowly, staring at me. I presumed my shop the whole time. I figured he was just shy, wanted a picture inside, and was too afraid or socially awkward to ask for pricing. Deep down, he gave me an uneasy feeling, but I decided to ignore it because he was a customer in the park and was probably just very antisocial. I kept a smile and tried pulling in customers all day, every day. One day, I smiled and waved at him. That was probably my big mistake. He walked over briskly to stand in front of me and stare at me. I was creeped out. I was scared. He then asked about prices after days of walking by me and staring. I breathed a sigh of relief and started going through my memorized sales pitch. After I finished, he started to smile. Not a normal smile, one that made my skin crawl. He leaned in so close that I could smell his breath. He asked how much it would be for him. I was confused as I'd just gone through my price list, so I stated that prices were set and non-negotiable unless you were an art company employee or a park employee. He shrugged and walked off. When I ran through my pitch, a family had grown interested and wanted some pictures, so I gladly took them into the shop and had a wonderful time photographing them. While I was checking the family out and collecting payment, I looked up and the man was back, leaning against the chain barrier in front of my shop. The family collected their things and walked to the chain. The man had to move to the side for me to open it for them. I immediately closed it behind them as he tried to push his way into the shop. I told him I was sorry, but only paying customers could come in. He wasn't allowed in unless he was considering a purchase. He frowned and walked away. I waited a few minutes, tidied up the shop, and stepped back outside. It was almost closing time, so it was pointless, but I had to stand outside or else I'd get into trouble with my boss. I noticed him one last time that day. Across the way from me was a game, and I saw him hiding behind it, peeking his head out and looking at me. I can't tell you how scared I was. I wanted to cry. He continued to do this for the entire week, and I eventually began to ignore him, which he did not like. On that Friday, as soon as the park opened, he made a beeline towards me. I was out front organizing outdoor props, and I froze. I hastily dropped what I was doing and went inside, closing the chain behind me. He paced back and forth in front of the chain, muttering to himself and looking at me. I was so terrified I was going to run to the phone and call security if he didn't leave. He suddenly lurched forward, grabbing the chain in both of his hands. I'll never forget this moment, because my heart stopped and my blood ran cold. His eyes were wild and that same menacing grin was back. He started whispering about things that he wanted me to do to him. It was disgusting. He was talking about how he loved me and all of the things that he wanted to do to me. He wanted me to put him in a dress and said he wanted me to humiliate him in front of all the people in the park. I was slowly backing up to the wall in my shop as he started yelling and laughing. I told him to go away, that I would call security if he didn't leave right away. He got even more angry and said something that keeps me up at night, even a year later. "I'll be waiting for you when you get out. Meet me by the employee's exit on your way out, or else." He gave me that most disgusting smile and walked away. I went behind the counter and started sobbing. I never imagined I'd have something like this happen to me, and now that it had, all of my knowledge of what to do went out the window. I was crying like a little girl. I decided to tell my manager at the end of the day because I didn't want to be afraid of coming to work. When I told him, he was mortified that I hadn't told him sooner. He walked me to a secret exit to the employee parking lot so I wouldn't see the man. The next morning, we went to the security office and I gave a description to all of the park security of what he looked like and what he normally would wear. I went back to my shop with 2 coworkers, and not even 5 minutes later, here he came, strolling over with an angry look on his face. I hadn't met him and he was furious. My coworker noticed my panic as I ran and hid in the back. I hadn't told them of my situation yet, and when I did, they told me they wouldn't leave me alone even after their shift was over, seeing as I was closer and they didn't want me to be left alone. I called security and told them what he was wearing, so they updated information. They posted a security officer outside of my shop. He seemed to disappear because of that. When the officer left to take care of something, he came back. Security realized that every time a clothed officer was around, he would hide, so they posted a plainclothes officer across from my shop posing as a customer. I was being used as bait ultimately, but I felt it was important to get him out of the park. Security eventually apprehended him later that day as he was headed towards my shop. They asked me for identification on him, and I remember breaking down and sobbing. The officer comforted me. Finally, this nightmare was over. He never physically threatened me or wielded a weapon, but he was doing enough verbal threats to make me fear for my life. They banned him from all 6 Flags parks around the country, revoked his membership status, and took him into custody. Unfortunately, as there was no violent act committed, they had to let him go. As I drove home that night, I saw him walking on the side of the road, and I immediately sped away in fear that he would see me through the window and chase me. At least he couldn't get to me at work anymore. I found out a couple of weeks later from one of my security friends that he saw my stalker being arrested in a town over. I went and looked up arrest records for that town later in the day and saw that he had been arrested for indecent exposure, public endangerment, and public intoxication. I know what happened to me is not as severe as other stories, but it was one of the most terrifying weeks of my life. You really don't think something like this will happen to you until it does. So please, everybody, always notice who's around you at all times and be cautious of everyone. I used to live in a seaside town in California. Living there most of my life, I had seen a lot of strange people, but never really had a bad experience until the story I'm about to tell you. Perhaps it was because we were young, that we never paid attention to the things around us. Things were probably happening, but we never saw the horrors of our town. All I know is that we felt safe all the time, even though we shouldn't have. I was 14 and both of my friends had been the same age. One of my friends, Sarah, had been my best friend for 4 years prior and is still my best friend today, even after 14 long years. My other friend, Alice, had known me for only a year or 2 prior and was new to our shenanigans, but fit in all the same. You see, me and my best friend, Sarah, had been avid role players since the day that we had met. I remember all the recesses we spent in elementary school pretending the play structures were castles and that dragons resided in them. When we met Alice, we introduced her to this, and she fell in love almost instantly. All of us had created a world where we could be anyone and do anything. As time had gone on, we began LARPing by dressing up in capes and costumes as the characters we had created. We even collected sticks that we swung around and sword fought with, accidentally ending up a few times with bruises and scrapes. Role-playing had become a large part of our friendship, and even now we still partook in some of this, but as life goes, when you grow up, you rarely find the time to do things. Back then, though, whenever we could, we would band together and go on our own adventure, but time was always limited, unless we had a sleepover together at one of our houses. Most of the time, we would all stay at my place. I think why we chose to be at my place so often was because of the freedom we had. My father wasn't a terrible father, but he wasn't the most traditional parent either. He let me and my friends do whatever we chose to do, as long as we weren't getting ourselves into trouble. Because of this, we would walk around at night a lot because it was quiet and the streets were mostly empty of people. Many of our role-playing sessions mostly took place after dark for years without incident. Sure, my friends' parents didn't like it when they realized we had been doing this, but we had done it anyway. At the time, we had specific places that we designated for perfect role-playing session spots when we didn't feel like wandering. One of them had been the park near my apartment. This park, when you walked into it, had a hill with a walkway that led down into a sandy play area below. This play area had swings, a slide, and some upright pipe-looking things that looked like they could have been from Mario, but blue. But the one thing that I always thought was strange about this play area was the giant cement sculpture that was meant to be climbed on and inside of. The sculpture had holes all over the place, even ones on the bottom where you could climb up and underneath it. It kind of reminded me of one of those sculptures that Delia Dietz had in Beetlejuice. Lastly, beyond that playground, down a little hill, it flattened out into a field. This field was huge. It had a bathroom all the way at the other end opposite from the park and was big enough that it contained 2 baseball diamonds. Because of the baseball areas, there were cages above the pitcher's mound and the entire field was fenced on one side. The path that led to the play area continued on the other side of this fence and the field was on the other. So as you could tell, this was a role player's perfect spot to go all out, especially with LARPing. And when it was at night when no one was around, you could do whatever you wanted without being looked at funny or being told not to flail giant sticks around. One crisp night, we 3 girls had a sleepover at my place. We decided that night was a great time to go out and adventure. We threw on our capes and grabbed our sticks that I kept near my front door and we headed out to that grand old park. It had already been dark at the time, the street lamps glowing with their eerie golden glow above as we had made our way to the park, which had only been about 2 blocks away. When we reached the park, we made our way down the path while we talked excitedly about our game. I remembered as we approached the top of the hill that overlooked the play area. I had the feeling that we weren't alone, but we continued into the park anyway, making our way down the hill. A moment after, I felt unease though. We noticed we really weren't alone. Seeing the strange sculpture from above on the walkway, I had seen a dark silhouette of a man sitting inside. This person looked large compared to us, and they certainly weren't giving off good vibes, although they weren't doing anything. Because of this, we decided to bypass the park and continue on through the giant grass field. At this point, all 3 of us continued on talking about our game. We didn't think anything of it. This park often had teenagers messing around at night drinking or the random homeless person just trying to sleep or take a break. We had already made it about halfway across the large dark field when I had this nagging feeling to look behind us. I turned and saw the dark figure of the man we saw in the sculpture making his way down the small grassy hill onto the field. I told them both what was happening and they too looked behind, seeing the man walking. At that point, we all started to get uneasy. At this point, I had just hoped that he happened to be walking in the same direction, that this guy just then decided to get going somewhere for some reason, but nothing about it really felt that way, especially when the silhouette's pace began to quicken. With how rigid this man walked and the strides he took, he looked like he could have been on drugs and looking to possibly start trouble. He looked like he could start charging at us at any moment. Thoughts of this guy mugging us or assaulting us flooded my brain, but I tried to reassure myself that this guy would be really stupid attacking 3 girls, especially when they all had sticks the size of Gandalf's staff. We kept walking in the direction of the bathroom and decided among ourselves that we would stop at a picnic table not too far from it. I honestly don't remember why we decided to do this. I think we were trying to pretend we didn't notice this guy and play it cool. Or maybe it was because we wanted to be ready and facing this guy if we wanted to start something. Either way, the bench was sitting directly under one of the streetlights, so we were in the direct view of anyone who could have been watching what might take place. Whatever it had to be, this had been our plan. We kept looking behind us and the man was getting closer and closer, gaining on us. This bench wasn't much further, but it had felt like we were walking across a huge expanse. Although it was dark, we could see him doing something with one of his hands. At the time, I'm pretty sure I was afraid of him having a weapon, but as he got closer, I started to get the picture of what he might have been doing. At this, we had sped up our pace a bit, rounded out one of the open gates on the fence, and made it to the bench. We quickly swiveled and sat on the bench so we were facing this guy. He made it to the gate and stopped at the opening. Now illuminated by the streetlight, we could see him. He was playing with himself. He was tall, thin, and was almost completely bald. This guy had a blank 1,000-mile stare, and although this guy was touching himself, his eyes flashed murderously. This guy was most definitely tweaked out and thinking about doing something bad. But to our relief, the crazy idiot stood there for a minute, looking at us, and then just disappeared back into the darkness towards the playground. We waited for a while until we saw the guy disappearing out of the park up the road and far away before we moved from the bench. I could tell all of us were uncomfortable and kind of freaked out about what had happened, but we kept making jokes about it. We joked about how he was rolling dice very intensely because he wanted to play an RPG with us. Yeah, we were kind of messed up kids. We were fully aware of what happened, we just didn't take it very seriously. After that, though, we decided to go back to my place because none of us felt like it was worth sticking around after that. Plus, the mood was utterly ruined. None of our parents heard about it after it happened, though, and things went on as normal. We started to go to that park less at night. It never really felt the same after that. We talked about it now and again, but over time we put it out of our minds. I remember for the longest time we normalized it, and in my mind it kind of set in as not being that big of a deal. Nothing happened, but even then, and after all those jokes we made, looking back on it, it's pretty messed up. How we took it, what the guy did, how stupid we were, but thank God we had those sticks, or who knows what he would have done to us. It's scarier now than it was at the time it happened. I had this boss, who I'll call Mike, and he had come in to fill in for a few months while my regular boss was on maternity leave. He was pretty amazing. He inspired me to work harder and even ended up promoting me. The two of us, and a third employee that I'll call James, were always working shifts together. It was fun, just laughing and kicking butt because we all had a similar sense of humor, and James and I were definitely the best employees there. After Mike's time to fill in was over, James and I were super bummed because he was seriously the best manager. He was fair and rewarded hard work and truly cared about employee satisfaction. Plus, he just made everything fun, even though we were working harder. We both looked up to Mike as a manager and as a human being. We had the utmost respect for him, and we vowed to keep in touch when we parted ways. Well, fast forward a year or so, James and I ended up dating. We kept in touch with Mike, and he was so happy we ended up together because he thought we were both great people who deserved each other. We saw Mike a few more times and kept in touch over the years through social media. When James proposed and we started planning our wedding, we knew we wanted Mike to be in it. He was part of our trio back before James and I even knew we would be together, and the three of us had a bond. We asked him to read something during the ceremony, and he accepted, expressing how honored he felt. Well, when it got to the day of the wedding, Mike was nowhere to be seen. We kept calling him as the ceremony was quickly approaching, and finally James got a hold of him. Mike told him he couldn't get out of work and wouldn't be able to make it. We were both taken aback a little because the Mike we knew and looked up to would never bail like this and not even let us know. We figured there had to be some reasonable explanation and were pretty disappointed, but the wedding had to go on. We had James's niece to do the reading even though Mike's name was printed in the program. Well, fast forward again a few more years. We'd only spoken to Mike a handful of times since the wedding, but he had also taken the time to write me a beautiful, lengthy recommendation letter in that time period. There was no hard feelings about the wedding, and James and I still shared the highest of opinions of our friend. Then Mike kind of disappeared off of social media, and the next time we tried calling him, his phone number had changed. James and I exchanged sentiments of concern and hoped he was doing okay, but I didn't go much past that. One day, James got a random call from a number that wasn't in his contact list. He answered it, and it turned out to be Mike. So he put it on speakerphone so I could say hello too. We had our brief pleasantries, but then Mike got into the reason for his call. He wanted to know if he could stay with us for a day or two. My initial reaction was, of course. But James shot me a sharp look, so I added, "Well, let's discuss it and we'll call you back." Before concluding the call, James inquired about what was going on. Mike said that he had been living with his father to care for him because he was terminally ill, and that he couldn't stay there another night because he checked the camera footage in their home and seen his dad on tape, standing over him with a knife while he slept. When the call was ended, James said he thought something was off. I didn't really get why he'd instantly be that suspicious. I mean, the story was insane and all, but it was Mike. James said something like, "We haven't heard from him in forever, and now he's just calling us for a favor? He lives 2 hours away and we're the one he calls? Why wouldn't he be seeking the help of someone closer? I mean, he has family in the area too." I agreed that it was all odd, and it definitely conjured up a lot of questions, including why there were even cameras inside their house. But I still didn't like the idea of leaving Mike hanging if he was truly out of options. I told James we should call back and probe a little more. When we called back, James asked if it would be easier to have someone closer help him out, and asked about family in the area. Mike gave a vague explanation of why everyone in his life had turned against him. Then, with the most mopey, disappointed voice, he said it was okay if we couldn't help, that he understood what was going on and wouldn't bother us anymore. James and I looked at each other and said we'd call him right back. We quickly discussed that this was all very strange, but that he had to be pretty desperate to contact us for help. We acknowledged that this little bit about understanding if we were unable to help was meant to manipulate us, and we felt conflicted about everything, but ultimately decided a few days couldn't hurt. We called him back, told him he could come, and figured we'd give him the address and that would be that. But he said he no longer had a vehicle and would need to be picked up. We asked about catching an Uber, and he said he had no money he could access at the moment, which we didn't pry him on. It was getting late, and it was a long drive to his location, so we asked if he had anywhere to stay for that night, and we could make that trip in the morning. He said he'd just sleep on a park bench or something, which, again, we knew was meant to manipulate us, but we didn't cave in on that one. We asked where we should pick him up the following day, and he gave us his dad's address. Immediately after we got off the phone, we're like, what? What's been going on with Mike that has ostracized him from all his friends and family and caused him to lose his car? He's been making 4 times our salary when we all first met, had a brand new car, and now he didn't even have money for an Uber? We went and picked him up the next day, and I got out and ran up and gave him a hug. He seemed oddly unresponsive to my affection, so I just shrugged it off and showed him to the front passenger seat where I'd been sitting. He was super tall, so I let him sit up there and I hopped in the back. When we got back to our house, we showed him to our guest room, and he put his things down and then immediately asked if we could take him to the grocery store. James says he was done driving for the day, so I said I'd take him, but commented that I thought he didn't have any money on him. He told me that he had food stamps, which there's no way he would have qualified for this with his old job, so I knew something was up. But I wasn't going to dig into the personal details of his finances, so I just logged it in my mind and kept my mouth shut. You might be thinking it just sounds like someone who fell in hard times, and that was basically Mike's story as well, but it was just very vague in important areas, and full of story after story about people that seemed determined to destroy him for no known reason whatsoever. 1 or 2 bad eggs is believable, but no one is the innocent victim in every scenario. He was telling us that he had no idea why his life had fallen apart and why those close to him seemed to turn on him out of nowhere, or why so many people were out to get him without seeming to have any motivation. 2 nights turned into a week, and finally James asked Mike what his plan was. Mike acted hurt and said that he would be gone by the morning. We told him he didn't need to leave immediately, but we'd like to have some kind of idea what his plan was going forward. That night in bed, James and I discussed it and decided we'd tell Mike that he could stay for as long as he needed if he wanted to help out around the house and keep his room relatively clean, because it contained several antique items of James's mother's. We also were going to ask him to help me with some entrepreneurial decisions, as Mike had claimed to have been a totally self-made successful entrepreneur before his streak of bad luck, series of unfortunate events, and I had recently been laid off. We presented our offer the next day, and Mike excitedly accepted. We thought it was going to be a rewarding trade-off for all parties. Now, this isn't a story about my marriage, so I'm not going to go too far into the wealth of problems James and I had, but a little info will be necessary. James was highly critical of me and often talked down to me and seemed to have nothing but negative opinions. I wasn't perfect, but I wanted to be loved and work my butt off for James's approval. I was constantly trying to make him happy, but no matter what I did, I would fail in his eyes. After a few weeks, Mike clearly started to see the cracks in the marriage, despite the fact that James toned it down in Mike's presence. Trying to be a good wife, I acted like all was fine in front of Mike and never mentioned any dissatisfaction in my marriage. Mike and I started to spend a lot of time alone in our entrepreneurial pursuits. He was supposed to be teaching me the tricks of the trade within several avenues of making money, but we kept coming out with little success. He had excuses and explanations for why his wisdom didn't seem to be progressing us forward at all, but he was someone I greatly looked up to as a professional and a friend, so I just believed that it would all pay off soon, like he said. After living together for weeks, enough talking among all of us had been done to start noticing weird contradictions to many of the things Mike had told us, but he always worded things in a way that left a slight amount of room for doubt if you were to question any of it. There was never a way to straight up catch him in a lie. Mike also wasn't fulfilling his end of our deal at home. He kept saying he'd take his turn to do the dishes and such, but probably only did it once or twice, and he completely trashed the guest room. Not only was there garbage everywhere, but he'd bring in food and drinks and they'd be lost in the sea of clothes and trash, and we could smell things rotting. There was a melting tub of ice cream sitting on the bedside table for weeks. I didn't care as much as James did, and I suggested we just remove his mom's things from the room, and I did agree that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, things were getting more and more icy with James and I, and one day when I was out with Mike on a job, I broke down in tears about how much I was hurting about how James treated me. Mike offered words of comfort and reluctantly admitted that he'd picked up on how mean James could be to me and said he was very sorry and that I didn't deserve it. Mike, having been possibly the only witness I ever had to what I had been going through in my marriage, this was amazingly validating. Mike agreed that it was incredibly unjustified, but made me promise not to tell James that he'd said anything because he didn't want to appear like he was taking sides. The next day, Mike once again volunteered to take a turn doing the dishes, so I didn't do them. I hate doing dishes and happily left them for Mike when he assured me that he'd handled it. Well, Mike got a call informing him that his dad didn't have long to live, so he wanted to go see him. James didn't seem at all interested in helping, so I volunteered to take him and to stay for moral support, and we headed out. On the way to see his dad, Mike started telling me his dad has dementia and makes up weird things, so he advised me not to take anything to heart. He cited a few examples of things he previously said, and they were all more like accusations. One of them being that Mike had stolen all the money in his savings. I thought it was pretty odd, but couldn't really reconcile the vast difference between the Mike I had met 8 years before and someone who could rob his dying father. While we were visiting his dad, I didn't say much as I didn't want to insert myself into a private family moment, but I kept noticing things that were weird, like that his dad was fully conscious and talkative, and didn't seem like a dying man at all. He even asked us to get him Burger King in the middle of it all. I kept trying to justify things in my head, like, who am I to say a dying man can't want a final meal at Burger King? A few hours in, James called, irate that I had left again without doing the dishes that Mike promised to do. He chewed me out and threatened divorce, which was always his go-to to try to whip me into shape, and having the recent affirmation from Mike that I wasn't the only one who saw James's emotional abuse, I said, fine. Divorce won't be thrown in my face anymore, so divorce it is. Back in Mike's dad's room, his dad was yelling about how his will and money and such, and Mike looked at me in a way to signal that the dementia was talking. I had started to really question what happened with his dad and if he was really dying at all, but it wasn't something I could really handle investigating at the moment, given that I'd just separated from my husband. When we left the hospital, Mike's dad was still alive and eating candy bars. I had nowhere else to go, so I went back home and slept upstairs on the couch. I didn't speak to James for 2 whole days, and then Mike said that he'd talk to his mom and I could stay there for a week. I wondered why his mom wasn't the one helping him if they were in contact and on good terms, but I just accepted the offer. I couldn't take being at that house anymore. Mike said that he was going to go with me and stay there too, which I thought looked really bad, but he said he spoke to James and that he understood and was fine with it. I spent the entire week crying and talking to Mike about how I felt, and he even woke up in the middle of the night with me if I woke up and started spiraling downhill. He made no advances on me or anything of the sort. After the week, I went to stay with my parents and Mike went back to stay with James. I eventually saw them both when I'd come over to get things, and in talking with James, he was very much ready for Mike to leave. They barely seemed to talk and did not seem on good terms whatsoever. One night, I got the weirdest impulse to ask James if Mike ever said anything about me that made him promise not to tell me. James hesitated for a second, but said yes. Through a series of questions, we inched through both of our experiences with Mike. He had been playing into our rapidly declining marriage and using everything he observed against us. He had been going out and teaching me things to make money, and he did the same thing he did as my boss all those years before, told me my strengths and complimented my ability to catch on to things quickly. We didn't have much success, but it was very obviously not on account of me. However, he was going back and feeding into James's terrible opinion of me and claiming we weren't making any money because I was so dense and hard to teach. Mike would also comment on the very things he told me were unacceptable that James did, except he'd tell James he doesn't know how he lives with someone like me and that he'd go insane. He was carefully and strategically forcing our marriage to fall apart by exacerbating our personal fears and insecurities and systematically validating and encouraging our resentment for one another. He did it in such a way that neither of us doubted his sincerity for a moment, until I finally got a weird feeling and decided to ask that night. And even then, I didn't really anticipate finding out that he'd been two-faced and manipulative to that extreme. James kicked him out that night, and neither of us had talked to him again, as far as I know. I haven't spoken to James in 1.5 years. I proceeded with the divorce despite this, because even though Mike was incredibly insincere, he caused me to get enough distance from James that I was able to see I deserved so much better. Last I heard about Mike was from his mom, who called me to see why that he had been asked to abruptly leave James's house. I told her what he'd done, and she didn't seem surprised. I asked if she was aware of any mental problems he may have, and she said she didn't want to betray her son by giving details, but that he isn't right in the head. I asked about several of the traumatic events Mike had claimed to be the victim of, and she said there has never been evidence that any of it really happened. I don't know why he actively initiated the final downfall of my marriage, because I've never felt it was an attempt to be with me. I don't get what his motivations or gain would have been. Mike's mom texted me a few days after he left James's house to tell me that he had been admitted into a psychiatric facility and wouldn't be out for a long time. This happened 6 or so years ago when I was 16 years old. I didn't even realize how unnerving this all was until recently. When I was 15 to 16 years old, I went through a phase where I would constantly get hair extensions put in. I had a favorite salon that I always went to. The two ladies were lovely and would always compliment me on my appearance. Stuff like, "You're so pretty, girl. Do you have a boyfriend? I cannot believe you're only 15." In which I felt absolutely flattered. However, after my 6th or 7th appointment, they started asking me more about why I was single and if I was interested in having a boyfriend, and I would always reply with the whole, "Yeah, when the right one comes along" spiel. During an appointment, they started chatting about me being single, again. This time one of the ladies started talking about her brother. She said that he lives in Africa, but he would absolutely love me and that I should meet him one day. I asked her how old he was, and she said he was in his early 20s. I was 15. Due to the age gap and the fact that my older brother would have killed me for even talking to a guy in the year above me, I politely told her that I was not interested in meeting her brother, but thanks for the offer. She got visibly upset and said, "Why? Come on, he'll look after you. Let him take you back to Africa and we'll make you the African queen." I just shook it off because they were always so nice and I just assumed that they were joking around. I remember telling a few friends about it and having a laugh. They said I should have taken the offer. It was soon forgotten. Fast forward 2 years and I was around 17 years old at this point and had just gotten my driver's license. It had been a while since I had hair extensions put in, and I thought that I would treat myself to change up my look and, of course, see my old stylist for a catch-up. I went to the salon. It went smoothly. I went from short hair to long hair in a matter of 2 hours, and I was on my way. Before I left, one of the ladies asked if I wanted to come back tomorrow to try out their new hair oil serum for free. So I was like, yes, nothing is free in this life. Sadly, I was like a moth to a bright light. I went in the next day, super keen for this oil because my real hair was super damaged. When I arrived, there was a man in the salon too. I assumed it was their friend. I didn't think too much about it and sat down to get my free serum. The whole time this man was just staring at me, and when I say staring, I mean staring. He did not say a word the entire time, but just stared and did a strange giggle every time I said something. His vibes were not sitting well with me. After they finished, I just wanted to leave, so I gathered up my things, said thank you very much, good day, ladies, and sir. One of them stopped me on my way out and said, "This is my brother I was telling you about." "Oh, let him walk you to your car." Unfortunately, my car was parked literally 10 minutes away, and I did not want this stranger walking with me for 10 minutes, so I politely declined. They kept insisting, in which I kept declining. I said no, no thank you. I do not need nor want your brother to walk me to my car. Thank you for offering, and for free oil, bye. I left the salon and started walking. However, I was not alone. The brother was walking 2 meters behind me, and where the salon was located was practically like an alleyway leading into a car park, leading into back streets. I turned around and told him again that I really did not need him to walk me to my car. I was very capable, thank you, goodbye. His reply was short and to the point. "No, I come with you." No worries. So I walked briskly all the way to where my car was, and not a word was said. He just walked 2 meters behind me. Sometimes he caught up and would walk next to me, and this went on for 10 minutes. I felt so terribly awkward and uncomfortable and scared as it was getting dark and I could not see anyone else. When I was near my car, I had enough of this grown man, so I turned around and said, "I do not need you to follow me anymore. Thank you for walking with me. My car is in the car park. Goodbye." He finally started talking. "Where's your boyfriend?" And me, being an incredibly smart woman at age 17, said, "I don't have a boyfriend." Dumb. What he said and did next I will never forget. There was an elevator right where we were standing that went to the upper level car park. He summoned the elevator, which I thought was strange. When it reached us, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You need to come home with me, or I will make you my African queen," and grabbed my arm and started to drag me into the elevator. Obviously, I started screaming and fight mode kicked in. He was a lot stronger than me, as he was a male in his late 20s and I was the small 17-year-old with a fresh weave. But boy, you best believe your girl can scream. My heart was in my throat. It felt like I was in a movie, and I genuinely started bracing for assault in this elevator. An amazing gentleman who must have been in the car park somewhere heard me and ran over, which made the salon lady's brother let go of me and absolutely legged it, ran away very quickly. Thank you to the kind man who saved me that day. I do not know what would have happened in that elevator. And to the salon ladies and their brother, for the 1000th time, thank you, but no, I did not want to be the African queen. So this story takes place in Fayetteville, North Carolina, near Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I went to college for 4 years. Anyone who is familiar with the area knows that Fayetteville has a large population of homeless vets near the base, also known locally as Vietnam. I had just turned 20 years old and had moved out of the house for college over 2 hours away. I had previously worked at a nursing home for 2 years, so I had a special place in my heart for the struggling elderly. My roommate and I had moved into a little apartment near the college and bought a rinky-dink washer and dryer set off Craigslist. Well, the washer didn't last a week until it went out, and we had to start using a laundromat. My roommate was busy with homework, so I offered to do his laundry for him if he would do mine next week, and he agreed. So I grabbed a bag with laundry accessories, my phone, school books, about $15 in quarters, and our clothes in a dirty hamper and left. The layout of the laundromat was, at the front of the store there were 2 rows of washers, and then 2 rows of dryers near the back, then dryers on the walls on the left-hand side near the front. There were 2 tables, kitty-corner to each other, one at the front left-hand side, one at the back right-hand side, then chairs lining the left of the walls. At the laundromat, I threw all of our laundry into a machine and pulled out one of my books for school to start studying. I was sitting at the table closest to the exit towards the front. Out of the corner of my eye, a woman with a child sitting down on the chairs to the left, and I see an elderly man with a military hat standing in the middle aisle getting frustrated with the machine. It was really hard to watch, and I felt obligated to help him. I grabbed my bag with all my laundry stuff to come to his aid and asked him if he would care for some help with a washer. He said yes, and I looked at his washer, and he had no soap and was missing a quarter in the slots. As I got closer, I could smell his very potent stench of body odor coming from his laundry. I offered him a Tide Pod and gave him a quarter. He thanked me, then walked back over to the front tables. I pick up my book to start reading, and he catches the corner of my eye again. He was taking all of his clothes off and putting them in the dryer. He was now in only a white undershirt tank top and his shorts. At this point, I am realizing that this man is indeed homeless and might have a few screws loose, so I should be careful. I watch him walk to the other table near the back of the store, then walks towards my table with a big trash bag and sits down on the other side of the table. I smile at him and he smiles back, showing that most of his teeth were missing and that his canines were very decayed. He starts small talk with me until there was an awkward silence. I could tell he was really lonely and wanted to talk, so yet again, I feel so bad for him I try to strike up a conversation. I asked him about his military hat, and he got a flash of pride in his eyes and tells me that he was a veteran that fought in Vietnam, and starts to tell me about all the things he used to do for the military. When he was finished telling me, I told him that my stepdad was a Korean vet, and I had a lot of respect for those who served and thanked him for his service. He asked me how my stepdad was, and I told him he died from cancer when I was younger, but I loved him very much. He looked me dead in the eye and tells me that he was sorry about my father, but I could call him Daddy any time. then puts his hat on me. I start freaking out, thinking this man has lice, so I took it off relatively calmly and handed it back to him. I wasn't sure if he was trying to be funny or not, but I told him that he was making me very uncomfortable and I wanted to be left alone to my studies. He nodded and took his bag over to the other table. A few minutes passed and the lady and her kids that were sitting to the left leave, and just like clockwork, he comes over to sit with me again, this time without his bag. He came over and apologized to me and explained that he didn't mean to be rude and gave me a bag of candy. I try to decline it, telling him that I have a dairy allergy. I do, but he refuses and puts it inside my bag of soaps. I say thank you and he nods and sits back down. I try to ignore him and he started to make these noises like he's in pain to get my attention, like he was having a fibromyalgia flare-up or something. I asked him if he was okay and he said, "Yeah, I'm just getting old." I giggle and he tells me, "I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, you have the most beautiful red hair I've ever seen. You remind me of my girlfriend." I asked him to hold on and I switch my clothes over to the dryer. So I ask him about his girlfriend, and when I return, he tells me that she died of a heroin overdose 2 months ago. I tell him I'm sorry. He then asks if I would be his girlfriend, and without a second thought, I then try and convince him that I am underage, and that would be highly inappropriate. I'm 4'11" and about 100 pounds, so I figured it would have been believable. He then tells me that he doesn't care and he can keep a secret, and then touches my hand that's on the table where he sat across from me. Shivers went up my spine and I told him, "I'm sorry, sir, but no, I have a boyfriend," and pulled my hand away to text my roommate to come help me at this exact moment. And at this point, his gaze seems rather predatory and my heart is beating out of my chest. I put my book down inside my bag and start gathering things to get out. I am trying to be slow enough not to alarm him or provoke unwanted behavior. I was wearing a tank top and sweatpants at the time, and he then comments that he can see my cleavage and that they look like nice breasts and he wished to suck on them. I stopped acknowledging him and threw my bag into the bottom of the hamper, started walking to the dryer where my clothes were, still sopping wet, and started shoveling them as fast as I could into the hamper. All during this time, he is telling me that he would take me to a hotel and do all these horribly graphic things to me if he had the money, and that he had 60 years of experience in pleasuring women. I still am trying to ignore him and have almost gotten all of my clothes. He then either picks up the underwear that had fallen on the floor in my scramble or had taken them from the hamper while I wasn't paying attention. The bright blue thong catches my eye, then I look at him. I look him dead in the eye as he flicks his tongue through the space of his missing front teeth like a snake. He starts bringing my underwear to his face, which I snatch so fast it startles him. He starts hightailing it to his bag to the back of the mat, and I panic and head to the door with all my belongings. I've never seen an old man run so fast. He grabs a bag and runs towards me, asking for a ride to a nearby town and if I would wait for him. He grabs my shoulder in my struggle to open the door, and then I scream, loud, and I have some pipes on me. He freezes. I make it out the door and then my car without hearing him behind me. My guess was that he was looking around the parking lot and laundromat, making sure no one was around. I'm not sure if I wasn't paying attention. I threw my laundry into the back seat and then he starts walking out to my car. He arrives at it just as I was getting in and locking my doors, asking for a ride again, pulling on my door handles, begging and crying. I leave, having a total panic attack. I get home and wake up my roommate and just start bawling my eyes out. I tell him everything that happened and made him promise me that he would go with me next time. I am not sure why I didn't just leave without the laundry, then come back with my roommate. I'm not sure why I did a lot of things that led to it. I guess it's hard to have a clear head in stressful situations. All I know is that I'm so glad that I made it out and avoided that Vietnam vet. This story happened a year ago when I was 15 and on a school trip in San Francisco. At the time, I was very immature. Not in the sense you'd normally think, but in the sense that I didn't really know how the world worked and how scary it could be. I attribute this story and a few other scary things that happened in the past year to me growing up and realizing how the world really works. I was rooming with 2 other girls in my room, both who were a year older than me, so I didn't really know them well. The way our trip worked, so to say, was that breakfast in the hotel was between 7 to 8, but the chaperones on the trip wouldn't wake us up, so if we wanted to have time to get ready and eat before we left to explore the city for the day, we had to do it on our own. This meant that in the morning, me and the people in my room didn't see the chaperones till we all went down for breakfast, usually around 7:45 since we all took a long time to get ready. However, this day was different. We were tired of arriving late and having to eat quickly, so we woke up a bit early to go down for breakfast right when it opened. We ate breakfast with pretty much the rest of the kids on my trip and all headed to the elevator together. This was a mixed boys and girls trip, and my twin brother also happened to be on the trip, so the people in the elevator was him and his friends, me, the girls from my room, and a few of their friends. The elevator door was almost closed when 2 Indian men stuck their hand through the door and stepped inside, squeezing themselves into an already packed elevator. They looked young, maybe 19 or 20. Eventually we arrived at our floor and all got off. So did the men. The way the hotel rooms and hallways were situated was essentially just a square. You could go any way around the floor and eventually make it back to the elevator if you turned left and right 3 times. The people on my trip went right and the men went left. Eventually, my brother and his friends trickled off into their rooms, and it was just me and one of the girls on my trip. The other one had went into one of the boys' rooms. We were right at our rooms when we encountered the men again. At first, we didn't notice anything wrong. They were probably just trying to find their room. I turned away from them and tried to find my room key and my wallet. Now, at this point, my immature brain didn't notice anything wrong, but my roommate did. I could see the panic in her eyes, and as I turned to look at the men, I realized they weren't looking for a room. They were looking for us. My heart began to race, and we panicked, each fumbling for our room cards to get into our room as quick as possible. But they were moving towards us too quickly. We were standing there, pressed against our door, as these 2 men stepped closer to us and got within half of a foot of our faces. Their English wasn't the best, so they slowly asked us what we were doing. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do in this situation, so my roommate spoke up. She tried her best to not let them know that this was our room, but it was obvious at this point. She stuttered something about trying to get into a friend's room, but these men clearly weren't there to know what we were doing. I could tell that they were there for something more sinister. One of the men continued to stare at me and eye me up and down while the other got really close to my roommate and asked for her number. She stood up tall and quickly said, "No, I'm sorry, you can't." But her voice trailed off as her confidence wore off. At last I spoke, explaining to them that they were underage and that we were on a school trip, that we couldn't. They didn't take no for an answer. At that point, I slowly started to pull my room key from my wallet. Luckily, my friend pushed the card back into my wallet and made me push my hand holding my wallet behind my back. At the time, I was confused why she didn't let us go into our room, but now I realized she had more intuition about these men than I did. She knew that if we opened our room door with them right there, they'd likely force themselves in there with us, and who knows what would happen. Eventually, they backed off enough where we felt we could escape from them. She grabbed my wrists and pulled me along the hallway as we sprinted towards the elevator. Along the way, we ran into my brother and one of his friends. We quickly explained to them what happened, and they sprinted with us to the elevators. Once we were there, quickly pressing the elevator buttons to get downstairs where our chaperones were, we encountered the men again. I clutched onto my brother's arms, and my roommate did the same with my brother's friend's arm. They just stood on the other side of the hallway, staring at us and quickly walking towards us. It looked like they were pretending to be just normal hotel patrons in front of the boys, but we knew that they weren't just normal patrons. They were creepy, and we weren't risking it. Finally, the elevator opened, and I don't think I've ever clicked the closed door button so fast. Right as the men got to the elevators, the door closed, thank God. We thought our ordeal was over, but it wasn't. There were multiple elevators in the hotel. My brother, his friend, and my roommate and me had just gotten to the breakfast hall where most of our group and chaperones were when we realized that men were there too. They had followed us. They started off staying across the room from us, but were getting closer. We left the room and went back up to our rooms. Once there, my roommate and I were panicking. They knew where our room was. They knew our floor. They could find us at any time, and we didn't know what they would do. Our panic was cut short when the phone in our room rang. At this hotel, you could call other people's rooms, and we thought it was from one of the boys' rooms playing a joke on us. We were wrong. When we picked up the phone, it was just heavy breathing and quiet laughing. We hung up after 20 minutes. I called my brother and his friend and asked them to meet us outside our room. They walked us to the elevators and back downstairs. On the way, we told them about the phone call. My brother's friend took responsibility for it. My roommate believed him, but I didn't. I knew they wouldn't freak us out like that. They were just trying to calm us down. Once downstairs again, still shaking, we told one of our chaperones about the 2 other men and they freaked out. We told the front desk about the men, but since we didn't know what room they were in or their names, they told us they couldn't do anything about it. They tried to reassure us that there was a group staying there that we're probably a part of and that they were probably leaving in a few days. Unfortunately, it didn't calm us down. I'm a girl and I am not good with talking with people, and in high school it was even worse. This is important even though I was a sophomore at the time. I had a free last period. My antisocialness was pretty bad. I'd hide out in the library during lunch unless it was odd days and my friends would catch me and made me socialize. The first time I met him, it was one such a time. They brought me over to their big group and a guy I didn't recognize was there. Let me tell you, dumb 15-year-old me even got the Nope vibes from this guy. My creeper was named Craig. First thing off about him was his hair. It was long, blonde, and beyond straight, like unnaturally so, almost wig-worthy. It was just a weird curtain of golden hair which hung around his pale face. Secondly, his eyes, bright blue and beady, you could feel them looking at you, and they always stayed the same, looking so cold and glassy. I had to sit next to him because it was the only space available. He seemed polite, and I was always taught not to judge a book by its cover, so I tried my best to ease the vibes I got from him, mainly because everyone seemed to think he was a great guy. What a bunch of idiots they were. After the first lunch, I didn't think much of him. I was dumb, naive, and frankly couldn't care that every lunch he happened to sit by me. I decided one day, because there was a breakup in the group, that I was going to sit with the girls consoling my friend Jessica. We were in the hallway right outside the cafeteria, which sometimes kids ate their food at. They had a stick out on either side where doors used to be when it was a bomb shelter before it was converted into a school. A lot of kids used to use their phones there to hide from teachers. We sat right behind one of the stickouts, Jessica sitting in the center, me resting against the stickout doing math homework. The bell had just rang and I went to pick up my bag only to turn around and see Craig standing there, less than a foot in front of me. He has a blank stare and small smile on his face. I oddly say hi and pull my bag straps over my shoulder. He doesn't say anything and just stares. I sigh, just waiting for him to ask where my friends went so I could nope out of there. Without saying or even blinking, he suddenly steps closer. I step back, swallowing and looking around for any help. Of course, everyone is rushing off to class, so there I am, alone with Craig. He doesn't say anything, doesn't blink, and I'm staring up at him. He was a grade older than I was, so though I was tall for a girl, it really didn't help me there. I feel his hands skirt around the edge of my shirt, and I jump into flight mode, racing past him quicker than I have ran before. From then on, I try not to sit by him, get to the odd lunches earlier so I could pick a seat and get sat next to by my actual friends. He started standing behind my chair, resting his soul-patch adorning chin on the top of my head and letting his slender man long arms hang down and touch my hips. Sometimes when lunch would end, he'd squeeze me, hugging me right below my breasts while I died inside. My friends thought it was cute and that I was blushing because I liked him. I started hanging out with Jessica in the hallway group more often. The wall thing happened again, but this time he had his arm out blocking me, running by him because I was stuck between the stick-out and him. He had curled his fingers through my hair and was murmuring some stuff I couldn't understand. It was a full 2 minutes of him going from touching my hair to rubbing my hip, all the while I was having a panic attack. Then the late bell rang. I ran and hid in the downstairs bathroom for a good 20 minutes. I was happy to go to ISS. I should add that I have been wearing long sleeves, baggy clothes, and even turtlenecks after the first incident, but I also lived in New Mexico, so I didn't need layers. And by now, I had told my friends about what Craig was doing, and they had tried to stop us from having contact as much, walking me to class after lunch, blocking him at the lunch table. I had even gone as far as to report it to a counselor who basically was my best friend. She was angry about the whole situation and the fact that she couldn't do anything about it because they had the 3 strikes rule. Craig found a way around this. Like I mentioned before, I had a free period and I hid out in the library. The library was my sanctuary. I loved and still do love books. I would spend my half-hour reading every science fiction, psychology, whatever books caught my interest that semester. I was in my sci-fi corner, which for one of the reasons I chose, it was completely hidden from the librarians and everyone else's view. I really didn't want to be disturbed. I was halfway through The Time Machine, good book by the way, and all of a sudden I look up feeling like something was off. Lo and behold, Craig had a research period. There he is, without saying anything, he sets his bag across from me and he stands behind my chair. I couldn't breathe at this point. His hand instantly finds literally the only skin that my turtleneck had somehow gotten over. He smells my hair and squeezes my hips, his nails literally digging into my skin. Craig was mad with me. I thank God I put my bag in the chair next to me because he had to sit across from me. I don't know how long he was standing there for, but when Craig stopped, I nearly died of happiness. When he did finally sit across from me, leering hatefully, with his icy eyes burrowing themselves into my memory, Craig hunched over the table, leaning over to me. "Can I ask you a question?" I'm literally petrified, about to pee my pants here, so my brain wasn't working well with me. Yeah, sure, go for it. But for the love of God, don't touch me, I thought. He tilts his head, smiling softly while saying, as though asking about the weather, "Is your mom a MILF?" For the life of me, my innocent ears had no clue what that could possibly be. I don't know, I don't think so. I had abandoned my beloved book and was nervously begging the bell to ring while covering up my assaulted hip with my turtleneck. He didn't seem deterred by my answer and smiled. "Well, what about your sisters?" Craig chuckled, his voice lowering. She a thought?" My jaw dropped. Even I knew what that meant. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw this girl, a senior, tall, curvy, and staring at Craig with what I can only describe as pure shock. Thank God she was there. "No?" I managed to whisper as the girl places back a book and perks up, looking back at us as though she just cured cancer, but it has bad side effects. "Hey, do you know where I can find—" For the life of me, that girl had no chance to finish her sentence. Grabbing my bag, I jumped up and was by her side within the moment. "Yep, I think it's over here." Led her to the completely outside of the library where we didn't go, and instead, she and I walked out of school. The entire time, this unnamed chick held my hand. Once we were out, she hugged me and had me talk to her. I told her everything about what happened, and woman told me first thing tomorrow I should report it to the counselor again. I told the counselor, Miss Gates again, and she reported it, changing my lunch, and telling me to take my free period in the computer room. 2 weeks later, of blissful Craig-free days and my lunches switched back. It turns out that since Craig failed a year, he was 18 and he had sent some illicit pictures as well as lewd messages to a freshman who then reported it to the counselor. 3 strikes and probation, Craig was kicked out of school and sent to the university. My first encounter was a couple of weeks ago. I needed a few things, so I was at a store and everything was pretty mundane, until I realized a man was walking around the store behind me, pretty close behind me. To be honest, he was closer than I was comfortable with, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. I brushed it off and thought perhaps he's just not very aware of personal space. It was a reasonably large store, so I figured he wouldn't be behind me the whole time anyway. I was wrong. He continued to follow me around the store, was behind me in the queue to pay, and walked out of the store behind me as well. It was just as I was walking out that I heard a shutter sound. The sound a lot of phones tend to make when taking a photo if they aren't muted. I recognized the sound, and a store doorway seemed to be a strange place to take a photo. Plus, this man had already made me uncomfortable, so I looked around. He was still pointing his phone at me. At the time, I wasn't sure if he had taken a picture just of my back in general, or if he was being much creepier than that. But even so, I wasn't happy about it, so I decided to say, "Excuse me, did you just take a photo of me?" I asked him. He lowered his phone and glared at me. The weird part of this was that he seemed oddly familiar to me, but I guess that's not relevant. He didn't bother actually answering me, just glared at me for a while, then sneered and went back to pointing his phone right at me. I asked him to stop, and he took a picture of my face. I didn't know then if he was actually breaking the law or doing anything wrong, so I decided the best way to get out of the situation was just to turn back around and leave. He followed me again, and I did my best to ignore him, though I could hear the sound of him repeatedly taking pictures behind me. I got fed up of this and went into another smaller shop in the hope that he would go away, or I could take a moment to text or call someone to pick me up in a little more privacy. I was actually a little surprised, given that he followed me all this way before, that he stopped then. He lingered outside the door for a while, glaring at me through the window, and eventually wandered off. I knew this was a weird way to behave, but I wasn't entirely sure what was going on. It wasn't until later, having talked about the situation online, then done some searching, that I found various pictures of me on some very disgusting creepshot websites. Fortunately, my face didn't appear to be included in those photos. I did report that he was stalking me to the police, and I contacted these sites trying to get my pictures removed, but apparently there's nothing that can be done at the moment. Well, I put the encounter behind me as far as possible, and for a few days, everything was normal again. Then one day, I was out with a few friends from my former work who I still hung out with. We were at a bar getting a few drinks together when one of my friends mentioned to me that someone was staring at me. Another friend looked over and said, "Oh yeah, I remember him. He came in the other day and asked about you." This was weird enough because I quit the job a few months ago and now live away from the premises, as just about all my friends know. Plus the fact that I don't know who he is, but he is weirdly familiar to me and apparently asked about me by my full former name that I recently changed away from. My friends and I talked about this a bit after a while. He appeared to have left and we shrugged it off. They were all getting a little drunk now anyway, so weren't really focused on the conversation. I don't drink, but the bar wasn't a reasonable hangout place for us, so I stayed with them. After a while, someone started paying for their drinks and buying me alcohol too. One of my friends decided it would be a good idea to drink the drinks intended for me as well as her own, and started feeling very intoxicated and ill. Being the sober one of the group, I called for a taxi. When our taxi arrived, and I was trying to bundle my drunk friends inside, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned around to see this creepy guy. "I need to leave now too. You girls mind if I join you?" he asked me. Well, of course I minded, since he wasn't above taking creepy photos of me and followed me around. I definitely didn't want to be in a taxi with him and 3 intoxicated girls. Even more so given that I was paying for this journey. "There won't be room. Just get your own," I told him, helping my friend into the taxi and going to get in myself. He grabbed my butt as I was getting into the taxi and then said something in a language I don't understand, before going around to the front of the car and banging on the window to get the driver's attention. The driver wound his window down to tell him to stop, and he started telling the driver that he was with us and needed to get in. I insisted he wasn't, and fortunately the driver persisted in telling him to go away or he would call the police. He left us alone pretty quickly after that. The third encounter with him was today, several days after the first and second when I had pretty much forgotten about him. It's been a reasonably pleasant day and it's my day off, so I decided to go out for a bit. After a few minutes of walking from my house, I became aware of someone walking way too close behind me. I looked over my shoulder and it's this guy again. He was sort of glaring at me and smiling at the same time. I don't really know how to word it, but he had a really weird expression anyways. I just said, "Go away," and started walking faster until I found the nearest shop and went in. Again, he followed me but just sort of lingered outside for a while before leaving. I don't really know what's going on here, and I suppose he's just a creep. Last weekend, my friend and I traveled to Madrid. We're both in Portugal, so the trip to Madrid would be around 7 to 8 hours through bus. We were pretty hyped about it. We arrived Sunday around 5 to 6 a.m. The sun was yet to come out, but it was light enough that we felt we could walk from the station to Gran Via. As we struggled with our backpacks uphill, we began hearing a wimpy meow behind us coming from a building in construction. The meows multiplied and both of us looked back without stopping. We weren't freaked out at the choir of cats yet. We crossed the street and a small cat exited the building, friskily walking in our direction, tail upright and eyes sharp and focused. We both took notice of it because it didn't seem to slow down as he approached us. My friend, probably the most non-confrontational person I know, began walking faster while saying, "Don't worry, everything's fine, it's just a friendly kitty." But she was obviously terrified. At first I thought it was cute, but as the cat got closer, heading straight for us, without slowing down for a moment I realized something couldn't be right. What if the cat has rabies? I thought in the spur of the moment. When the cat was just half a meter away from me, I let out a rather feminine war cry and began running the opposite direction, scaring my friend even more and prompting her to run too. The poor cat jumped and reversed its direction when I screamed. We both laughed at our own figures, but deep down our balls had risen up so far in our bodies that they now served as forehead knobs. Now, in reality, I wish this was the only time we felt threatened. At least it would have been just a funny and silly episode and not a premonition of something much more malevolent. We kept making joke about being chased by cats while we were in Madrid. It was a lovely weekend. Around 8 p.m. on Monday, we ate dinner and headed back to the station. Keep in mind, we were exhausted as we had walked around 50 to 60 kilometers in less than 2 days. By the time we arrived, both of us realized we'd have to wait at least 2 to 3 hours before boarding our bus. We were tired, but decided that we shouldn't spend our last hours in Madrid just looking at the wall. My friend suggested we visit a park nearby, Enrique Tuerno Galavan Park. We'd smoke a joint, explore a bit, and come back before midnight. I agreed. I am too curious to not explore a park at night, like most of you probably are too. We got there and she's noticeably creeped out of how dark it is. We sit for a while, roll a joint, and try to enjoy the moment. I convince her to go deeper into the park, and we eventually arrive at an auditorium where we sit for a while, smoking some more and eating. 10 minutes into chilling in the dark park, I hear something snap behind me. Being paranoid as I am, I didn't turn back immediately, but kept my ears perked for other suspicious sounds, partly because I was scared of actually finding something. I told my friends to shush for a minute because I thought someone was behind us. She didn't seem very concerned, which struck me as odd. After a while, I turned my head, and sure enough, there was someone there, his head hovering above the neatly trimmed bush. I have incredibly poor eyesight, and it was pretty dark. Also, I was pretty out of it, so I couldn't understand if the person was facing us or facing the trees on the other end. Either way, I knew that he had seen us, or he wouldn't have stopped. I began to feel a bit threatened, but decided against acting on it, lest I freak out my oddly relaxed friend too. I tried to dismiss my paranoia. I heard sounds again. I figured the guy was leaving. I continued eating, and after a while got up and told my friend I was going to check on something. I just wanted to make sure that we were safe. The person had moved, so I knew he either had to go back from where he came or he had turned left and down the path. Either way, I would have been able to see him leaving. But you guessed it, I couldn't see him anywhere. A bit panicked, I walked around the bush pretending I'm looking for something on the floor while trying to see any sign of this person on the road going down. Where we were, there was only the auditorium, which was fairly well lit and empty, a road that went down, and the main road and trees surrounding every single one of these things. Because it was so badly lit, the treetops would prevent the street lamp's light from reaching the ground. All you could make out was the dark outline of the tree trunks in the distance. That's when I see it. A shadow of a huge person, arm behind a tree, seemingly staring straight in my direction. He didn't move and was fairly far away. I had to look a few times in his direction to make sure it was a person and not my mind playing tricks. Sadly, it wasn't. Shoot, now he knows I saw him, I thought. I go back to my friend and, trying to remain calm, I told her we should get going. She tells me she'd like to go a little further up the path and see the view. As this was on our way out and I didn't want her to feel threatened, I figured it probably wouldn't be a problem to stop there for a minute. I agree and help her carry her stuff. Turns out walking fast while looking over your shoulder in the middle of the night at a park is a surprisingly scary experience. As I moved, the shadow of the trees closer to me would move in front of the trees far away from me, creating illusions of people moving in between the shadows. At least, I thought this was an illusion. I am certain I'm seeing a human silhouette moving between the trees, but just as I'm almost making out a complete human figure, another tree blocks my view. I'm unnerved, to say the least. Unsure if I'm exaggerating, I spill the beans to my friend. I tell her of the guy who was behind us, and that he then went to hide in the trees, and how I wasn't sure if he was still following us because I couldn't see properly. She took it all pretty well. I am known for playing pranks, so I don't think she believed me. I also think she might have thought I was too high, which wasn't the case. This made me feel more relaxed, too. I'm probably just paranoid from smoking. We stopped at a viewpoint at the edge of the park. Honestly, it was pretty underwhelming as it was too dark to see anything. I noticed the path beneath us slithered left and right all the way down to the bottom. Hardly the best route to make a quick escape, I thought. We're both talking, and maybe because of the haze I was in, I forget about the men in the woods for a brief moment, or at least I felt convinced he hadn't actually followed us. I get up and turn slightly left. My balls fell to the ground. I control myself not to let out another girly scream. There he was, large and imposing, completely darkened by the shade of the trees. He must have been no more than 10 meters away from us. I remember thinking just how close he was and how unnatural his stance looked. Like a deer caught in headlights, he was frozen in the moment before his foot was completely planted on the ground. He was sneaking on us. The thought appeared in my mind like a raging siren. I knew the reason he was standing still now was because I was staring straight at him. That must have surprised him for a moment. "Barbara, we have to go now. He's right there." Something in the way I said it finally made her snap alert. She got up and we both pretended to be walking normally down the slithering path. Surprisingly, it was my friend who jumped over the bushes surrounding the path, all the way to the bottom. I was too terrified to look back and possibly seeing him at the edge of the viewpoint staring us down. We kept walking without looking back. We were shaken, but we got to the station without any problem. I do have to wonder what would have happened if I didn't turn slightly left in that moment. Still, Madrid was absolutely lovely. Next time, I'll avoid parks at night. So this has been happening for about 1.5 years now. Tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize that I wasn't imagining things. About 1.5 years ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I all of a sudden started noticing that things would be out of place when I would get home from work. Things that almost seemed out of place on purpose to mess with my OCD. Sometimes I would notice knives that were put back into the knife block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around my house being turned to face the wrong way. Sometimes my clothes were hung up in my closet the wrong way. Little things like that where I would feel something was off, but there was no way to prove it, and in all honesty could have just been me being absent-minded when putting things away. After a couple of months of things randomly being out of place and always having that creeped-out feeling, things stopped going out of place, and I put it to the back of my mind and stopped being so paranoid and moved on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. For the past couple of weeks, my cat has seriously been trying to tell me something when I've gotten home from work. Any of you who have a cat will know that exact meow. It's not an "I'm hungry" or "I'm angry because you've been at work all day" meow, but an "oh my god, you will never believe what happened" meow, if that makes sense. I didn't really think anything of it because cats can be jerks sometimes, and I just assumed he was just bored and wanting to complain. The other day when I came home from work, I noticed a pair of balled-up socks that do not belong to me sitting on my bedroom floor. My boyfriend came over the next night, and I told him he had left a pair of his socks here when he had stayed over on the weekend. He looked at the socks and said that they were not his. My heart sunk, and so did his. We both knew that someone had been coming into my house again, and that I probably wasn't imagining it the first time. A few days later, I came home from work and found a bag from a lingerie store on top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had come from inside my house, as I had just bought a bathing suit from that store a couple of weeks prior, and the receipt for that was in the bag. At first I thought my cat might have dragged it there, but upon inspecting the bag there were no teeth marks, as well as my cat couldn't have opened my closet door and gone into the paper and cardboard recycling that I keep in there on top of the shelf. The final and perhaps the most unsettling thing happened tonight. My boyfriend met me after work and we went out for dinner. We went back to my apartment after, and I went to unlock my door and noticed that it was already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave my house is the one thing I am most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it. It is not just a habit I have, but something that is deeply ingrained in me. Everyone who knows me knows this about me, as I even do it to their doors. I have to check 4 times or I get an icky feeling. Even my boyfriend was on red alert when he noticed my door was unlocked. We entered my house and I was checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged it, and it opened right up. I never leave that door unlocked. He witnessed me lock it on Sunday when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He saw me check it 4 times. I have not opened it since then. We are both convinced somebody has been in my house. Whoever has been coming in somehow has a key. The fact that they left the sliding door unlocked makes me think that maybe they're planning to come back with ill intentions. If they have a key, why would they need to unlock the sliding door unless they don't want to be identified by the security cameras at the front door of my building? Either way, I have already ordered a security system, but unfortunately it's not going to arrive for a few days. Any suggestions on anything I can do in the meantime to keep safe? Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, tonight we're going to have ourselves a real good time. I feel alive, and the world will turn it inside out. So don't stop me, because we're having a good time.